booktube. I've got some mail for you today, a couple of periodicals and some packages, no boxes. But talking with you about the mail and chatting about this and that will certainly settle my nerves after undergoing a particularly 21st century rite of passage. My Twitter account was hacked. A bot selling sunglasses hacked my Twitter account and spammed everybody with endless offers to, are you interested? Hey, buy these sunglasses. So I had to fumble around like Grandpa Simpson, asking Google, what do I do if my Twitter's been hacked? All that sort of thing. I think it basically means that I log out, change my password, and then log back in. And then go about deleting all of the junk passages. I'm still trying to do that. I'm hoping that I can make my account nice and tight and ship shape, since I do love interacting with people on Twitter. I don't do as much of it as I should in terms of promoting my own work. I don't use Twitter the way it should be used, but nevertheless, I have a blast. And one of you suggested that in response to the hack, I should wear sunglasses for today's video. And I actually thought that was hilarious. I cackled out loud when I heard that. And I looked around, but I cannot find a pair of sunglasses here. I don't think I have any. Why would I need them? I don't go to the beach. I don't go out in any way that... I wouldn't wear sunglasses while walking the beam. I would miss a lot of the details, I think. One way or another, it would have been a great idea, but it isn't going to work. So we're just going to have to make do with the mail. And the periodicals are two of my favorite periodicals. The first one is the New Yorker. This is a double issue for April 6th and the 3rd of May. And despite the fact that I'm telling you that right now, that this is a double issue, that in other words, next week there will be no New Yorker, despite the fact that I'm telling you that, I'm sure that next week I'm going to gripe. I don't know why I haven't been getting my New Yorker. I must smell. I swear. It must be very hard to put up with me. This is a double issue, and naturally I looked at the books coverage. And one of the reasons that I look at the books coverage in periodicals is because I'm part of that conversation, as we've mentioned on this channel many times. I'm part of the collective critical conversation about new books. That's all I write about is new books. I don't do any of these think pieces where I go back and rediscover conveniently the entire ethical ecosystem of the 21st century moment that I'm writing in, where I go back and conveniently find that in some earlier writer who didn't know it from a load of cabbage. I will occasionally read those pieces if they're written by friends or if they're written by people who are really talented, but I'd much rather just be in the scrim with you discussing the new books that are clamoring for your time, attention, and money in the bookstore, or your attention and time at the library. And so I'm naturally curious when other people do that same thing. Like I've mentioned in earlier videos, it gives me a slight bit of fluttering of butterflies in the stomach when I see it. Once I dig into the review, then it's different. Then it's seasoned professional to seasoned professional. I am confident of what I do. You are confident of what you do. Let's see how your review stacks up against mine. But for the very first second, there are butterflies. When I see, oh, so-and-so's reviewing a book that I reviewed, I wonder if they're going to make mine look terrible, or if they notice something really important that just blew right by me. I hate that. I hate that. And this issue has a couple in the book section. Pankaj Mishra, who's an author and reviewer that I really like, reviews the new biography of Edward Said by Timothy Brennan. And this is the New Yorker, and it's a long piece. It's like 6 pages long. So it'll be, I imagine, I haven't read it yet, but I imagine it'll be a large amount about Said and not just a book review. You couldn't write a 6-page book review of anything, let alone a new biography of some guy. So it'll be one of those New Yorker style things where it discusses Said and his career and his thinking and his book, and also touches on the biography. But then there's another one here by Amy Davidson Sorkin. I don't know, is she anything to Aaron Sorkin? I wonder if this will tell me, if this issue will tell me. A staff writer, is a regular contributor to Comment. She writes a column for NewYorker.com. Scrupulously no mention of whether or not she's the daughter of Aaron Sorkin, but one way or another. She writes a piece in the table of contents. It says, what do we expect from First Ladies? I haven't looked at the article, but I'm guessing that also, since it's in the book section, I'm guessing that it deals with First Ladies. And since it's plural instead of singular, there are two First Lady biographies this season in the new release market in America. One is about Lady Bird Johnson, and one is by Mary Tumulty about Nancy Reagan. I'd be willing to bet this article is probably about those two books. Actually, let's see. Probably a combination about those two books. And that gives me little butterflies because I have filed a review of Mary Tumulty's biography of Nancy Reagan, The Triumph of Nancy Reagan. And I'll be curious to know if this author, yeah, look at that. There's a row of First Ladies. How many of you recognize them? I'm sure you all recognize Nancy Reagan, and thanks to iconography, I'm sure you all recognize Barbara Bush. What about those two? Well, some of you will be showing your age by identifying those two. These two are easy, the iconography of those two. But yeah, this is about both those books. Lady Bird Johnson, Hiding in Plain Sight by Julius Feig, and The Triumph of Nancy Reagan by Mary Tumulty. So I'll have to wait and see what those were like. I don't think I actually have a copy here at the moment of the Lady Bird Johnson book. But I very much do have a copy of the Nancy Reagan book, and I wrote a review for the Christian Science Monitor, and it's I don't know if it's out yet. It's going to be up. I think it's going online. I think that one's also going to headline the print edition. It was a blast to do. It was just I've had a really, really good, meaty roster of monitor coverage lately, and extending into late May, and I couldn't be happier about that. Just couldn't be happier about it. But then the other periodical is the TLS, the London Times Literary Supplement, which I absolutely love. It's the single greatest book review organ in the English language, and I glanced at this as well. To see about those butterflies in the stomach. Like, for instance, someone named Alistair Blanchard reviews The Invention of Medicine by Robin Lane Fox, which is a book that I reviewed, I believe, for the Christian Science Monitor, or maybe for the Daily Star. But it's not a very controversial book, and there's only a couple of ways that you can read it. So don't have so many butterflies in the stomach about that. But there was another one I thought here that I noticed right away was something that I had already written about myself. Oh, no, it's not that. It's not that. It's something else. It's something that we mentioned on this channel, which is not to respond to critics. This issue of the TLS has a full-page essay by A.N. Wilson on Prince Philip. That'll be fun to read. But this also has an author, directly defying the piece of advice, the PSA that I gave you just the other day. Just the other day I said, if you are an author, do not respond to critics at all. Not for any reason outside of a factual error, and even then, not under your own name. And unfortunately, Timothy Brennan, the author of that Edward Said biography, did not get the memo because he responds at enormous length to the critic who reviewed his book for the TLS on March the 12th. Enormous length. It's half the page. It's just his letter. Unbelievable. And it, like I mentioned, it does nothing but harm to him. It makes him seem carping and petty, catty. It doesn't. You don't come away from this letter thinking, "Oh, that author he's really on the ball." Instead, you come away from this letter thinking, "Well, okay, the one thing I'm probably not going to do with the $30 I have burning a hole in my pocket is buy a copy of his book." He mentions, for instance, in his first response to that review, he's just going on and on. He won't let someone get the last word in about his own book. He mentions that the author of the review was being a little cowardly by waiting so long to come out with a book-length response to Edward Said's famous book, Orientalism. And mentions, Timothy Brennan mentions that might be cowardice on the part of the author, on the part of the author, or his name is Robert Irwin. And you would think that Timothy Brennan would recognize that the thin ice he was on once he did a little Googling and realized that Robert Irwin not only panned Orientalism in the month of its release, but he also debated Edward Said on a stage. So he wasn't a coward. He wasn't afraid to attack Edward Said and his ideas. You would think that once Timothy Brennan realized that, he would back off a claim of cowardice. Oh, you waited until 20 years or 30 years after he was dead to write a book, because you were afraid of him while he was alive. Well, Robert Irwin clearly wasn't afraid of Edward Said or his ideas while he was alive. He wrote a scathing review, and he debated the man. But nevertheless, Timothy Brennan not only reprises that insult and says almost 3-decade lag for his book does suggest what I said it did, when it doesn't. It doesn't. But in addition to that, he defends the main point. Seizing finally on my comments in the biography that some readers failed to understand Said's intentions, Irwin tries to turn the tables by suggesting that Said resorted to evasion and ambiguity to hide his lack of knowledge. But Said is not hard to understand. He wrote for appreciative readers, both academic and non-academic, and Orientalism itself was translated into 30 languages. The real impasse lies rather with the general anti-intellectualism that now reigns, with the low-wattage journalists, corporate media pundits, and area studies experts who are entirely resistant to the idea that concepts like narrative, image, and representation may have political implications. Said's training in literary theory had everything to do with his success and was at the core of his argument in Orientalism that even disinterested scholars can be part of an imperialistic common sense. That is what Irwin cannot grant, because the subject matter is so close to him he cannot but take it personally. In other words, not only is Irwin too stupid to understand Edward Said, but so is literally everybody else. Just mind-boggling. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about. You authors out there, do not respond to critics. This makes him look like the prince of all ponces, and he's the only one who doesn't see it. But there's also a maddening letter in here about Bill Gates' new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. Someone named Alex Faulkner writes in, James Carden gives Bill Gates some credit in his comments on Ann Pettifor's review of Gates' book about tackling the climate emergency, but does some disservice by saying that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation exists primarily to avoid taxation. The foundation certainly has some biases, for example, toward high-tech, big data, and U.S.-linked international funding, but it also makes a substantial contribution to community-oriented health projects in the global south. Part of its intended contribution to global health can be seen currently in its donation of more than $200 million to COVAX, the initiative of the Vaccine Alliance and the World Health Organization to accelerate bringing COVID-19 vaccines to low and middle-income countries. I think it is a perfect demonstration of the effectiveness of the PR money of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that even disinterested third parties who don't have a dog in the race somehow feel offended when someone is critical of Bill Gates. What about all the good he's doing? What about his foundation? What about all his philanthropic work? How on earth could you be negative? I wrote a negative review of how to avoid a climate disaster, and I also ran a negative review in Big Canoe News from a freelancer, also negative of the book. And the points that both of us raised are on display in this letter. What does the letter writer write? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is currently donating more than $200 million to COVAX in order to accelerate bringing COVID-19 vaccines to low and middle income countries. $200 million is what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funnels through in terms of money in 1 month. 1 month is $200 million. And the letter is entirely correct. That money is going to accelerate the process by which COVAX and the World Health Organization can bring vaccines to poorer countries in the global south. To accelerate that, to facilitate it, not to simply make it happen, not simply to afford it. So if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, instead of using 1 month's profit, I'm not talking principal, I'm talking just the profit from 1 month for a global pandemic that's killing lots of people, instead of doing that, if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation skimmed the profit for, let's say, half a year, they could simply buy this whole procedure. They wouldn't have to help other organizations to facilitate it. They could simply make it happen on their own, and that's just profit for just 6 months. It's not the profits for 10 years, which they could easily do and still not suffer any lessening in their incredibly sybaritic and plutocratic lifestyle. They wouldn't have to dismiss one sous chef on one plane, and they could still funnel that much money into the project. They just don't, because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does mostly exist as a tax dodge. And yet, when you say that, people who don't know Bill and Melinda Gates from a turnip in the road will say, oh, how can you? They're so nice. They do such good work. Bill Gates, in How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, spends 30 pages saying that climate disaster is an existential threat to the human species. It is going to cause the human species to go extinct unless something is done, unless climate emissions, carbon emissions, are brought to zero. Bill Gates spends 30 pages of his book saying that. And then he spends the rest of the book telling everybody else what they should do. Instead of that they should petition their lawmakers for clean energy, that they should petition their governments for financial subsidies in order to replace their old inefficient house heating units with more climate-friendly house heating units, etc., etc., etc. And in order to get the wisdom of those suggestions from Bill Gates, you have to pay him $35 for his book, which was made out of harvested trees, a whole slope of them. And that it was diesel-powered trucks that brought those trees to the warehouses. It was diesel-powered machinery that turned those trees into pulp and then pages. It was diesel-powered trucks that brought the vats of ink to that warehouse in order to print words on those pages. It was diesel-powered trucks and planes that then disseminated those printed books to bookshops all over the English-speaking world. And once they got there, the staffs had to be paid, the buildings had to be paid to keep the lights on, and the books had to be stacked. And then you go in and you pay your $35 to find out what Bill Gates thinks is the right approach to an existential crisis that he himself alone could fix. And yet, if critics criticize that, if they criticize the absolute Everest-sized hypocrisy in that, it's the critics that are the bad guys. Anyway, those are the two periodicals. Now I'm going to try and calm down. We'll do the mail. We'll just hope the mail doesn't irritate me. Let's see what this first one is. Okay, great. All right, fantastic. We saw this already. We saw the advanced copy of this. This is the finished copy. Very nice. This is The Killing Hills by Chris Offutt, who did a book called Country Dark that I really, really recommend to you. It was really, really good. And this is The Killing Hills. There are 1,000 of you who are here since the last time we talked about this book, so I can definitely read it again. Let's see here. He lives in rural Lafayette County near Oxford, Mississippi. And that is our author. I actually didn't know what he looked like. There he is on a rocking chair. So what have we got here? Let me tell you about this one. Award-winning author Chris Offutt, a lasting literary talent on a national scale. That's the Chicago Tribune that said that. It'd be nice if the Chicago Tribune would return my phone calls. Every once in a while I see a comment like that about them that leads me to believe that they run original book content, but I've never heard back from them. I'd love to write for the Chicago Tribune. Has just delivered his third novel and first foray into crime fiction. So this is the author's third novel and the first crime story. Although Country Dark had definite elements of that. A compelling, propulsive thriller in which a suspicious death exposes the loyalties and rivalries of a fiercely private place. The Killing Hills is also the first crime novel ever set in the eastern Kentucky hills. Is that true? Those of you crime fiction experts out there, is that true? Can that possibly be true? There's not an inch of the world that hasn't been the setting of a book. One way or another. Let's see. Let's go on here. Mick Harden, a combat veteran now working as an Army CID agent, is home on leave, which is about to expire. His wife is about to give birth, but they aren't getting along. He has retreated to his grandfather's cabin to think things through when his sister, the new sheriff in town, shows up to ask for help. There's been a murder in the hills, a woman found in a holler. With local power brokers pushing for the city police or the FBI to take the case, why, she isn't sure, She calls in Mick, whose investigative experience and familiarity with the terrain perfectly suits the under-the-radar inquiry. As he delves into the investigation, trying to stave off more death, he dodges his commanding officer's increasingly urgent calls about his impending AWOL status, and he needs to talk to his wife. So that's fascinating, right? Because he's on leave. He doesn't have forever to solve this crime. That's one of the gimmicks of crime fiction that I tend to love when it's intelligently done. I tend to love when the author comes up with some way to make sure that there is a time limit on how much time the protagonist has to solve the crime. I really like that, and I really like this author. Country Dark has put this author in standing with me, so that I haven't actually read this. I've had the advanced copy for a while. I think this is a May release, but the author is in such standing with me now that I'm going to go into this with all the goodwill in the world. He's going to have to trip and fumble and drop his keys quite a bit to change my mind. And he seems like a seasoned storyteller. I don't think he's going to do that, so I'm not all that worried. That's great. So a crime novel set in the eastern Kentucky hills. I have been over every inch of those eastern Kentucky hills myself, with dogs, some my own and some strays picked up. And like I mentioned when we got the advanced copy of this book, the world of those back hollers in Kentucky and elsewhere, but Kentucky's the place that comes to mind when you think about it. The world of those back hollers, I want to say it has to be seen to be believed, but a lot of people never see it. Most Americans wouldn't believe it. And you go up into those hollers with old houses, and trailers and whatnot that have been there forever. There's got overgrowth everywhere, no real roads, and you think, okay, I'm in the real back of the beyond, but the holler goes on from there. And there are places way back in there that only the denizens know about. They farm their own, they grow their own, they do without any kind of postal service or technology or anything like that. And those hills have started to be, in the last 10 or 15 years, invaded by militarized pot growers. I wonder how much of that will be in this book. It's going to be fascinating. So let's see what this next one is. Oh, very good. All right, this comes out in early June. This is by James Rom, and James Rom is great. I've never read a book of his that I didn't like. Let me tell you about him first. He's an author, reviewer, and the James Otway Professor of Classics at Bard College. His reviews and essays appear regularly in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Review of Books, and his previous accounts of Greek history include Ghosts on the Throne, which was about the death of Alexander the Great and the scrabble for his empire, and War for Crown and Empire, but also one other, right? There's a bunch of other. The little author bio at the back doesn't actually do justice to the full amount, because there are a couple of other things here. Dying Every Day, which was I think his most recent book before this one, which was about Seneca at the court of Nero. I think I reviewed Dying Every Day, maybe for the Monitor. I've been writing for the Monitor for a long time. I've written a lot of reviews for them, so it may be that I did that. But he was also the editor for the Landmark Arian, the Landmark series that gives you classical authors and then extensive maps and appendices, so that you really, it's a one-stop place for certain classical authors. I wish that they existed for all of them. But the Landmark Arian was really interesting, and he was the general editor on that. And this is his new book, The Sacred Band. 300 Theban lovers fighting to save Greek freedom. One or two of you that maybe know your Mary Renault novels really well will remember what The Sacred Band is. I don't think they get the press they once did. But let's hear about them just a bit. The story of the Sacred Band, an elite military unit composed of 150 pairs of male lovers, highlights a chaotic era of ancient Greece marked by battles, ideological disputes, and the rise of vicious strongmen. At stake was freedom, democracy, and the fate of Thebes, at this time the leading power in the Greek world. The author's tale begins in 379 BC with a group of Theban patriots sneaking into occupied Thebes. Disguised in women's clothing, they cut down the agents of Sparta, the city-state that had cowed much of Greece with its military might. Over the next 4 decades, the narrative swings from violent combat in city streets to massive clashes on open ground, from ruthless tyrants to bold women who held their era in thrall. The Sacred Band follows the twists and turns of a crucial moment in history culminating in the end of the treasured freedom of ancient Greece at the hands of Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great, who knew all about the sacred band. Fantastic. Okay, so this is coming in June, and it will be a $28 hardcover. So I'll be getting another copy of this. This is the advanced copy. Classical history, though. Not getting much of that this year, so that's great. That's fantastic. I will move on. This next one is heavy, so it will probably be a finished copy. Okay, very good. Very good. Well, I guess all I have to do is complain about something to get served it up. Here's more classic stuff. This is Hearing Homer's Song, The Brief Life and Big Idea of Milman Parry by Robert Kanigel. And some of you will know his name, right? Robert Kanigel is the author of 8 previous books, most recently Eyes on the Street, The Life of Jane Jacobs, which I think I reviewed for the Christian Science Monitor. I know that's an odd refrain. He's received many awards, and he lives in Baltimore. So what is this one? Hearing Homer's Song. This is about Milman Parry. This thing will probably be full of pictures of Milman Parry, yes? Oh, very good. This is one of those situations where, in addition to the inset of photos, there's also black and white photos scattered throughout the book. Great. So there is our main character in military uniform. And let me tell you about him. From the acclaimed biographer of Jane Jacobs comes the first full life and work of arguably the most famous, influential classical scholar of the 20th century, who overturned long entrenched notions of ancient epic poetry and enlarged the very idea of literature. In this literary detective story, the author gives us a long overdue portrait of Milman Parry, an Oakland druggist's son who became known as the Darwin of Homeric studies. So thoroughly did he change our thinking about the origins of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey that scholars today refer to before Parry and after Parry. Before Parry's trailblazing work in the 1930s, centuries of readers took it for granted that the Homeric epics were written like any other literature. Today, after Parry, we realize they evolved out of a long and winding oral tradition. Parry made it his life's work to develop and prove this revolutionary theory, and Kanigel brilliantly tells his remarkable story, cut short by Parry's mysterious death by gunshot wound at the age of 33. Fantastic. Okay, so every review journal in the world, or in the Western world, has a classics person, or a number of them, on call, just on the little Rolodex. They're going to get something like this. They're going to like the look of it. A lot of them are going to remember like Eyes on the Street. They're going to remember that Jane Jacobs book. And they're going to see, oh, I've got just a person. You know? So at the bigger places, those editors, sorry, a lot of my reaction talk to books now is going to be about being an editor, because I am once again the book section editor of a print newspaper's book section. That's a weird feeling. I'm still getting used to that. But those editors are going to know that they have someone out there, and they're going to think, well, okay, I have someone out there. I'll send it to them. And maybe they'll like it enough to write about it. Maybe that'll be the case. It's right up their alley, though. I don't want it sitting around here. Instead, I'll send it to them. So that's fantastic. This could lead to some reviews, some interesting reviews. That would be wonderful. And then we have our last envelope, and then we'll be done. Oh, look at the poor little thing. Oh. We walked until we were pretty tired a little earlier today. This is a big one. Great big book. Fantastic. Nice, big, 1,000-pager. That's very good. What have we got here? Oh, fantastic. Oh, great. Great. I requested this. Oh, wonderful. Okay. This is a little bit late getting to me. This is out already, but that's okay. That's perfectly fine. What have we got here? Lots of paperwork. I don't think I need so much paperwork. This looks fantastic. This is by Simon Heffer. This is 890 pages long, so 900 pages long. And this is The Age of Decadence, a history of Britain from 1880 to 1914. Look at the size of this thing. It's in your bookstores already. The Age of Decadence is a richly detailed history of Britain at its imperial zenith, revealing the simmering tensions and explosive rivalries beneath the opulent surface of the late Victorian and Edwardian eras. I know the Edwardian part of this story backwards and forwards. I am thrilled to have another huge book on the subject. Just thrilled. The popular memory of Britain in the years before the Great War is of a powerful, contented, orderly, and thriving country. Britain commanded a vast empire. She bestrode international commerce. Her citizens were living longer, profiting from civil liberties their grandparents only dreamed of, and enjoying an expanding range of comforts and pastimes. The mood of pride and self-confidence can be seen in Edward Algar's pomp and circumstance marches, newsreels of George V's coronation, and London's great Edwardian palaces. Now, this has got to go on, right? Oh, yes, okay. With another paragraph to go through here, because that all leads up to a but. Yet, beneath the surface, things were very different. In the Age of Decadence, the author exposes the contradictions of late Victorian and Edwardian Britain. He explains how, despite the nation's massive power, a mismanaged war with the Boers in South Africa created profound doubts about her imperial destiny. He shows how attempts to secure vital social reforms prompted the 20th century's gravest constitutional crisis and coincided with the worst industrial unrest in British history. He describes how politicians who conceded the vote to millions more men and disregarded women so utterly that female suffragists' public protests bordered on terrorism. He depicts a ruling class that fell prey to degeneracy and scandal. He analyzes a national psyche that embraced the motor car, the sensationalist press, and the science fiction of H.G. Wells, but also the nostalgia of A.E. Housman. Incredible. Okay, so he took a PhD in modern history at Cambridge, and he's written a bunch of other books, including A Life of Thomas Carlyle, A Life of Enoch Powell, something called Power and Place, The Political Consequences of King Edward VII, which I've never read. A King Edward VII book that I've never read. I need to find out if that is available, maybe as a UK trade paperback. What's it called again? Power and Place, The Political Consequences of King Edward VII. Good Lord. Okay. And this is, Age of Decadence is his first book to be published in America. And he's had a 30-year career in Fleet Street, good Lord, including senior editorial positions at the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator. And he's now a columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. Okay, so I need the UK trade paperback of Power and Place by this guy. But in addition, I'm very happy that he has a book in America. That's great. He has an Edward VII book. And you're not allowed to have an Edward VII book that Steve hasn't read, but he also has this great big thing. And because its pub date was in early April, and it's now going on late April, I get to read this thing right away. I'll read it tonight. Fantastic, fantastic. I'll clear the docket and read this tonight. Wade into this thing. I'll spend some time on it this weekend. Great, fantastic. Okay, so not a bad mail haul. So we have the Age of Decadence in the late Victorian and especially the Edwardian era. We have Hearing Homer's Song. Milman Parry gets a biography at long last. We have The Sacred Band by James Romm, one of our greatest classicists working today. And we have The Killing Hills by Chris Offutt. A death, maybe a murder, in the Kentucky Hollers. Great. Fantastic. So there you go. That is the mail for today. If more mail comes, you'll be the first to know. But otherwise, we will reconvene tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.